Hey guys, so this is the video recording for the conservation of biodiversity. So I'm going to talk through some notes. I want you guys to take notes with this. And this is going to kind of segue us through our human impacts unit. So far we have talked a little bit about biodiversity. And you should be working this week on your endangered species project. So we're going to kind of talk about that in this lecture. And then we're going to get into some types of pollution next week. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Okay. All right, so we're talking about conservation. We are talking about conservation of biodiversity. So, got some cute little fish on there. Okay, so an extinction, we've kind of already hit some of these terms when we talked about our evolution unit. But extinction, it occurs when there is no longer any of that species around anymore. So if we don't see any of that particular type of species present, we label them as being extinct. And statistically speaking, we lose about 50,000 species per year. And I know that seems a little crazy and drastic, but these species are not like, it's not like we're saying, oh, we lost 50,000 of this large animal that we see every day, 50,000 of those different types of large animals per year. These can be tiny little organisms that we don't even notice in our day-to-day. All right, so scientists, they want to preserve that genetic diversity. We've talked about genetic diversity when we talked about our genetics unit. Oh, no, I hit the wrong button. Sorry. Okay. Having some issues here today. Okay, so anyway, so we talked about in our genetics unit, we talked about that genetic diversity, and we really want to maintain that, all that variety that we see, because if not, we could run into the issue of inbreeding. Okay, so that inbreeding occurs when two organisms, usually we think of them as being related to one another in the context that we talk about it, but this is when their genotype is so similar, it can lead to some issues. There's not enough diversity to allow the organism to be successful. So remember, just a review of genotype. Genotype are the genes, those alleles that you get from your parents, and that genotype tells us what the phenotype will be. That phenotype is your outward appearance. That's just a quick little review from our genetics unit. So we want that genetic diversity. If not, if we don't get genetic diversity, it could lead to extinction. So we're going to talk about categories of endangerment. So right now you should be working on your project about endangered species. So there's some different categories, and you will probably see this on the website that I shared with you. There are different categories. So I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. The first category is least concern. So this is when we've got, for that species in particular, that's least concern. There's a lot of them, they're widespread. So we're not really worried about them. There could be some issues that are happening that we are causing, or, there are a lot of different factors that are in play that could lead to them being of concern later. But right now, they're doing okay. There's a lot of them and they're spread out, so we're okay with where they're at. Near threatened, that is when the species is likely to become threatened in the future. So they're okay for the moment, but we're really keeping our eye on them. We're really trying to not increase the damage, if that makes any sense. Then we move into threatened, species with a high risk of extinction in the future. So if they are threatened, we are really, really trying to preserve that species and help them build up their population again, or at least maintain where it's at. so that way they don't become extinct. And then the next stage up would be extinction. So that would mean that there are no known left of that species anymore. All right, so here's just kind of like some charts of some different categories of organisms. So we see birds. Most of them are in that least concerned category, that green color. So they're doing pretty well. 9% of them are the near threatened, 12% of them are threatened. So most of them are in that least concerned category. So that's pretty good. For mammals, 68 are least concerned, 7 near threatened, 25 are threatened. For amphibians, so that'd be like your frogs, that's 51% are least concerned, 8% are near threatened, and 41% are threatened. So our amphibians are kind of in the worst shape, according to this graph. So that's just kind of, we can look at charts like this and kind of see per kind of category of organism how that group of species are doing. All right, so here are some different reasons for endangerment. Okay, so the categories of endangerment are increasing to extinction. So it could be at any level of any of those categories, but some of the causes for a species being at any of those categories could be loss of habitat, an invasive species, pollution, population growth, climate change, or overharvesting. So we're going to go through each of those, okay? This is a fun little acronym too, HIPCO. You want to help you remember that? So habitat loss. This is our first one that could cause endangerment. So habitat loss is mostly caused by human development. So here I've got some pictures of this. This looked like it used to be a big forest full of trees, a big wooded area, and we've gone in and we've chopped down all those trees. There's so many different types of organisms, different species that live in this environment, and for most of them, we've just eliminated their home. We've eliminated their habitat. Now they have to repopulate, and if they can't, they are very likely to die, which is going to cause the number of the population of that species as a whole to decrease significantly. So our human development it plays a large part in this loss of habitat for our different species. All right, here's a map, and it's showing the different changes in the forest cover. So forest cover is like a group of, wooded area, a group of trees, where a lot of species are really going to thrive and live. So this dark green section, that's where we've had an increase in forest cover. The red is where we have a decrease. So thankfully there's not a ton of red spaces in the grand scheme of things. And then no change at all would be this lighter green color. All right, an invasive species. An invasive species is when it's exactly like what it sounds like. When a new species invades an area, it's going to throw off the dynamics of that location. So I want you to think, say like you play a sport. So like I played basketball when I was in high school. If a new person moved to school and I had my spot, I was shooting guard. If a new person moved in and joined the basketball team and they were also a shooting guard, that would kind of throw off the dynamics of the team. I would feel threatened in my spot. Just to give you kind of an analogy of a real world, if something new, a new species comes in, it's going to throw off the way that ecosystem works together. Okay, so we've got an alien species or an exotic species. This is a species that live outside of their historical range. So historically, if we think of that species living in a particular area, and now all of a sudden they move to a new location, in the past, we've never known them to live there. So that would be an alien species. They're moving into a new location that we've never known them to live in before. So an invasive species is when that alien species spread rapidly across a large area. So when these species that have never lived in this area come in and they spread rapidly, we call them an invasive species. They come in and they invade, they take over, it throws off the dynamic of those ecosystems. And then these are just some examples. This is a type of vine that comes in and takes over. The zebra mussel and the silver carp. These are the two pictures. This is the vine. It really looks like it's coming in and invading that area. Those are some cars in there that have been taken over by this vine. It's new to that location. It's never been there before, and so it's spreading very rapidly. And then these are the zebra mussels. All right, the next cause of endangerment would be pollution. So pollution is also largely from human interaction, human impacts. This threatens biodiversity because it's when we emit toxins, pesticides, heavy metals, oils, acids. If we put that out into the environment, it's going to threaten that biodiversity. It's going to have some negative effects on the ecosystems and the way that they interact, because it's introducing a new substance that's not normally there. And most of the time, these substances are pretty harmful. So it is going to lead to some endangerment. All right, population growth. This is another cause of endangerment. So there is a limited amount of food. There is a limited amount of space for any organism, right? We've only got so much space. We've only got so much food at any one time. And so there is a competition for that and how that all plays out. So as the populations rise, the earth becomes more and more populated as we increase more and more people inhabiting the earth. We've only got so much space to spread out, right? Same thing for animals. They've only got so much space to spread out. We've only got so much food. And so that can lead to a decline in the population once we maximize our occupancy, right? Or if we've got an abundance of food, if you got an animal, they've got an abundance of food and abundance of space, their population size might increase. Once they max that out and they're running low on food and they're running low on space, some animals might start to die off from hunger and different diseases from being in a largely populated area. So then that number is going to decline, right? So this is kind of a broad study, and it is called population dynamics. And so it's very interesting. There are a lot of different factors that go into play, and it's very, very relatable to human beings, right? So that's something we might get into a little bit more maybe next week. All right, climate change. This is another cause of endangerment. So the temperature, certain species can only survive in a range of temperatures, right? If it gets too cold or too hot, people are not going to do well, or organisms are not going to do well depending on the temperature. So climate change is certainly going to have long-term effects on which species survive and which species do not. And so it just kind of depends on the range of temperatures that each organism thrives in. And so that's going to vary depending on the species, but it could lead to endangerment. And then the last one is overharvesting. So this is when, people like to go hunting for sport or different things of that nature. When certain species are removed faster than they are being reproduced, then it can lead to endangerment. If we are hunting a certain group of organisms faster than they are being born and repopulating, then that population size is going to decline. So some examples that we have are the dodo, the American bison, and the passenger pigeon. These are organisms that are not being replenished as quickly as they've been taken out. So as a result of the over-harvesting, we've got some different acts and some different laws that have come into play. So one of them is, it was first passed in 1990, and it prohibited the transport of those illegally harvested game. So those primarily birds and mammals, like we just talked about in those examples I gave you. It's going to prohibit the transport of them across state lines. So this act was put in place in order to kind of, it didn't get rid of it altogether. People still do things like this illegally, but it was in the hope that it would decrease the amount that this happened. It would discourage people from doing this. So that's why we have things like the Lacey Act put in place. All right, and then we've got CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. So this is of wildlife, fauna, and flora. So this was developed in 1973, and its purpose was to control that international trade of these threatened organisms. So it's kind of like, now we think of it as this agreement between all these countries that in order to preserve these organisms, we are going to put this ban on this international trade of these endangered species. And it still does happen illegally, like I said in the last slide, but it's in the hopes that it will we will see a decrease in the amount that this happen. It will discourage people from doing this in order to preserve these endangered species. Murphy's playing behind me. Murphy. She's just chilling. Okay. All right, and then you are working currently, hopefully, on your endangered species project. Maybe you're already done. Maybe you haven't started yet. I encourage you to start on that if you haven't already. But I gave you the link for the red list. So the IUCN has this list called the red list of these threatened species. And so that's what I provided you with, that link to that website. So this is the way that we kind of monitor where these organisms are at, where the species are at. So they are broken into those categories of endangerment that we talked about at the beginning. So you're going to see, when you look at a picture and the name of the organism, you're going to see a little circle kind of at the bottom of that picture. And it will tell you what category of endangerment that species is in. And it will also provide you with some information as far as like what caused the endangerment, what could lead to it becoming worse in the future, some different things that are in place to prevent the further endangerment of that species. So this is a really cool resource that you can look at, and they keep it up to date, and it's just a really cool source to look at. All right, so we've got some legislation in place to help conserve some of these endangered species. So we've got the Marine Mammal Protection Act. It prohibits the killing of marine mammals in the U.S., and it prohibits the export or import of those body parts. So we can't trade them. We can't kill them. So this is going to protect our otters, our seals, our dolphins, stuff like that. People do kill these animals illegally and sell and trade them, but it is illegal. It still does happen, but we've got this in place to help protect those populations. And they're so cute, so like, why would you want to kill them? They're adorable. We've got the Endangered Species Act. It was first passed in '73, and so it authorized the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services to decide which species we're gonna be listed as threatened or endangered, and it also helps to prohibit the harming of those species. So it's also going to discourage people from hunting or killing these particular threatened or endangered species. It also makes the trade illegal, and it authorizes the government. It gives that government permission to obtain that habitat. So if there's a threatened or endangered species in a particular location, the government has the authority to take control of and own that location in order to preserve that species. That is called the Endangered Species Act. All right. So in 1992, a bunch of different nations came together and they made this pact, this treaty, to protect biodiversity. So the goals of this treaty were to conserve the biodiversity. They said, hey, this is important. We need to take care of it and maintain it. Sustainably use biodiversity and share the benefits that come from that biodiversity in the form of we can use the different resources that come about from that biodiversity for, drug testing, for pharmaceutical drugs, and different things of that nature used in medicine. There are a lot of benefits for medicine of this biodiversity. And so we saw it as being something that was very, very important to preserve and maintain and strive for. So that is why they came together to protect biodiversity. And I've got a couple more slides here. So we've talked kind of at the beginning of the year, we talked about ecology, and now we're kind of coming back to that now at the end. So this is kind of like tying it all together. We talked about ecosystems when we were in our ecology unit. So those ecosystems where all those different organisms are interacting, we need to preserve those and protect those. There's a lot of benefits that come from protecting the ecosystem as a whole rather than only trying to focus on one individual species in that ecosystem. When you're in an ecosystem as a whole, all of those species are interacting. They all have a role to play. They're all very important in keeping that ecosystem thriving. If you only isolate and focus on one species within that ecosystem, everything else gets affected that lives there. So it's important to focus on it as a whole. And then here's just a graph kind of from the early 1900s to 2000, the year 2000. And it shows you the increasing area of these different things that we've put into place. So these nature reserves and wilderness areas, we've got way more of those now. Those didn't emerge till the 1940s. We've got a lot more national parks, national monuments, habitat and species management areas, protected landscapes and seascapes, managed resource areas. Blue is no category. But we've got a lot of these things in place that have emerged in the last 100 years here that are showing that we are increasing our efforts to preserve this biodiversity and maintain that biodiversity. We see it as something that is important. So if this is something that you're interested in, there are a lot of resources that you can look at. So if you want any of those resources, please send me an email and I'll get you some. If not, I hope that you guys are staying safe and having fun at home and spending good quality time with your family and learning new hobbies and growing gardens. But mine's not growing because I did it wrong, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a gardener, but I'm trying. Anyway, I miss you guys. Bye.